What's going on, guys? Jolt here from TheTokenMinorities, and we are back with the playoffs for the TBL this week, taking on the Chicago Chica Dancers once again, coached by MattOshea and Olivia. Make sure to check them out. Be linked down in the description below. This is going to be, of course, the team builder for our quarterfinal game. But joining me is the man, the myth, the legend, Goldoa Dragon. Say hello.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first team builder of the TBL in the playoffs, and hopefully it goes as well as last week. But we did want to address one thing really quick, guys, before we actually get into it, which is for the first time this entire season, this will not be a live builder. It would be impossible to do another live builder after we've already taken an entire look at their team for an hour. So if you want to see a live builder with our first reactions to their team, go check out last week's team builder. But this week we actually sat down prior to recording this and built the team in advance, talked it out, really discussed some sets, and we're actually just kind of like both the sets of the Pokemon themselves as well as like the psychology of they just saw our team and we just saw their team. So there's a lot of sets that might feel maybe a little bit weird, but it's like we just saw what they were going to do. We just showed them our responses to some of their checks. And so what does that mean for this battle? And we can actually take that into account here. So we want to go more in depth about things like that and rematches as opposed to their original team and how we reacted to that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's this team builder is definitely going to be a lot more complex, more in depth than what you've seen for the past 6 or 7 weeks of the season. So hope you guys are excited for that. But anyway, just to reiterate what their mons are, they have the Clefable, Melmetal, Melodic, Incineroar, Noivern, Vikavolt, Avalugg, Crustle, Gourgeist, Toxicroak, and the Trapinch. So they have a squad that's pretty threatening on the defensive side, I think, is where their draft really shines. And we talked about that a lot in last week's team builder. So if you haven't already seen that and you want to see that overview of kind of our initial thoughts, just make sure to go check that out again. But anyway, they have a lot of really good defense kind of built around the Clef Melmetal core. And I'm pretty certain they brought that core like every single week, and if they haven't, they're probably making a mistake. So we're expecting to see that again here in the playoffs, no doubt. I think Clef Melmetal are guarantees. I think that the Specs Rotom that we brought last time around was really effective against them too. Like they didn't bring a Ghost Resist, and I mean in their commentary they definitely acknowledged the fact that their whole team was 2-hit KO'd by Rotom. So I definitely expect to see something come this week that can avoid the 2-hit KO from Rotom. I personally think that's going to be an Assault Vest or at least a bulky Incineroar. It could also maybe be like a specially defensive Vikavolt maybe, or like a specially defensive Melodic that can take a couple hits. I don't really know. That's not the best idea against a Rotom, obviously, but I think something's going to come that can deal with Rotom on the special defensive side. I think it's going to be the Incineroar, and we both kind of agree that Gourgeist might be forced to come if they want to have a mon that's not 2-hit KO'd by Banded Terrakion. So there's some Pokemon on their team that they in a sense are kind of forced into bringing, which does kind of help our perspective on the team builder here. I think for this game is what's kind of nice about that too is like all 4 of those mons are pretty slow, and like we can take advantage of that with our mons too.
Yeah, we were definitely starting out with looking at, okay, they have really solid defense, but our offensive threats absolutely just go in against their defensive options. And we just happened to have it. I don't even know if it was good drafting or just what it was, but we happened to have a check to every single one of their defensive options that basically makes it hard to justify bringing. Because I mean, Gourgeist feels like it has to come because the Terrakion, every other mon gets 2-hit KO'd by a Banded Terrakion at least, and Gourgeist loses to most of our other mons in our team, and so it's tough for things like that. Melodic on some level feels like it has to come, but then it doesn't really offensively pressure anything. Which usually Melodic being a really good wall can stop things on different sides of it, but this time it just doesn't feel like it has that option. And I agreed right off the bat that Clefable Melmetal was a really solid core. I felt like the fact they didn't bring Incineroar last time means they're very likely to want to bring it this time. Another thing we wanted to talk about though is the at least I want to talk about it a little bit, is the psychology of a rematch. Because it's a weird opportunity, right? And especially a rematch the next week. you literally just played this team, and sometimes it's earlier in the season, sometimes there's been transactions, but the idea is you know what the other person is thinking, or at least you can go back and you can watch videos oftentimes and see what they're thinking. And if you don't have that video, at least you have like their moves, their mons, and the way that they played. And one thing that we definitely noticed is in their play, they wanted their defensive mons to be their offensive threats. They wanted them to kind of do both roles. So that's why they led with that Clefable and were spamming Moonblast. That's why Melmetal was used offensively with that Power Herb to try to catch the Seismitoad. And I think the same thing is true when they use the Incineroar this week that we're very much expecting to come. They're going to want it to be defensive and offensive. But the problem is Mons only have so many EVs. They can only do so many things. And so it's sort of a guessing game on Jolt and I's part, how we think that they're going to EV those Mons and then what we can do to react to those situations. But what we've decided to build this week, and I think right off the bat is very clear, is that whatever they bring, we have an answer to it. And oftentimes more than one. And what we're expecting them to bring, it's very hard to justify seeing some of the other mons. So for us, the Trapinch doesn't feel like it's a good mon to come against our roster. And as a result, that makes Volt Switch from Rotom once again, and just like Electric Spam from Rotom, incredibly free. And so even if Incineroar comes as the check to Rotom, we still just can hit it with a really strong electric attack. And yes, they might be able to take 2, but if rocks are up and they're AV, then they're going to take a lot of damage. Whereas if they're boots, then they're not AV, so they take a lot more damage. So it ends up being a really hard decision for them to try to check our offensive threats. And that is true across the board for a lot of other things. But I think Jolt had the right idea. He said, okay, these are the things that I think they're going to run. These are the ways they're going to expect our team to go. So let's do something a little bit different to keep them off balance as long as possible with our mons. So Rotom came last time. It was specs. It did so much work with a choice specs. So this time we were like, what if we don't run choice specs, but instead run a different Rotom, and they have to now try to assess what Rotom we're running when they're afraid of specs for as long as they will be.
Yeah, just that kind of thing definitely is really nice in the rematch scenario like this, and I do think that they're going to have to prepare, really heavily for the specs Rotom because it just looked so good against them last time. I think the specially defensive Gardevoir was a huge issue for them last time too, and they're going to have to prepare accordingly for that as well. Maybe able to run something like a Calm Mind Clefable this time to give them an option, to beat Gardevoir 1v1 in theory. Stuff like that, I think, is what they're gonna feel like they have to do to deal with some of the mons that gave them so much trouble last time. And even the Terraqueon's the mon that cleaned up in our game last week, and that pretty much means that they have to respect it. They are forced to respect it, and the only mon on their whole team that can avoid a 2-hit KO, maybe, from a banded Terraqueon is the Gourgeist. So I feel like that's pretty much forced to come as well. So really, I feel like the team we brought last time, even though it was obviously a really rushed team, I think it's kind of backed them into a bit of a corner with what they feel like they have to bring for this matchup. So that part of it is definitely nice here. Now, one thing we also did last time around is we brought really a setup spam oriented team. We had I think at least half the mons on the team, maybe over half, had a setup move on them, like a Nasty Plot or an SD or whatever. And that means that the Unaware Clefable is definitely an option that could come this time as well. And as a result, we're actually packing a lot less setup on the team this time around. We're definitely taking more of a momentum into breaking power type of approach with this team, along with some additional speed control to maybe help us combat the potential Sticky Web option. But we're actually not weak to Sticky Web once again with this team. So Sticky Web is just not really going to be a problem for us in this matchup. If they decide to bring it, that's totally cool. We're gonna Thunder Wave some stuff and not really care. So I do think that the Unaware Clefable is actually an option this time. Last time around in our team builder, I made the comment that I don't think Unaware Clefable is the best bring against us personally. I think Magic Guard is almost always better just from personal use with Clefable, but I think this time around in the rematch scenario, I could very well see the Unaware Clef being something that comes. So with that in mind, the mon that I decided that I thought was a really good idea to build a team around was the Gardevoir with Choice Specs. So Choice Specs Guard, it doesn't 2-hit KO a fully specially defensive Magic Guard Clefable, but that's only if it's fully specially defensive. and it's likely that it's going to want to run some Biz Def to help take a hit from Terrakion, for example, as that's a mon that could do a lot of damage. Plus, it probably wants to run a little bit of defense to take hits from like a Psy-Shot Gardevoir as well. So I don't really think Clef's going to be fully Spadef, and that means that a Choice Specs Gardevoir actually 2-hit KOs the entire team, aside from Assault Vest and Incineroar, which is going to be, you know, pressured by other members of our team, and aside from like a more specially defensive Melodic or Melmetal, which are also going to be pressured by other mons on our team too. So just spamming Moonblast just seems really, really nice against their team. We only had Moonblast on our guard last time around, and that was pretty effective. Now we're just going to hit, you know, a whole lot harder with it. So yeah, I think Gardevoir has a really nice matchup here.
Yeah, and I liked the fact that we also decided after that, we said, okay, we're going to run the Specs Gardevoir, so let's actually switch the Rotom to be our especially defensive check to a lot of their offense. So instead of running a Specs Rotom and a specially defensive Gardevoir, we have run a Specs Gardevoir and a specially defensive Rotom. Rotom, as a set, was back and forth between a bunch of different options. We, as all Rotom forms are wont to do, it was really hindered by 4 move slot syndrome for a little while, until we realized that we don't care about webs and we don't care about a lot of things, and so we decided we don't need defog. So this thing is a pretty hard counter to the Vikavolt, almost exclusively, but then because of the fact that, I don't know if you're showing at this point the...
No, I'll show the
Teambuilder side.
Yeah, this is just the team matchup stuff.
But because of the fact that they are so detrimentally terrified of Terrakion, they have to respect it as a threat, because it outspeeds everything except Noivern and doesn't die to one hit from Noivern anyway. We just figured that Gourgeist has to come, and that's just another thing that is Rotom food.
Yeah, seriously.
So honestly, Rotom, you know, it's a low tier mon. It doesn't always have great matchups, but the stabs this week just happen to be absolutely fantastic, and they were last time too, and we talked about it then. And so I like the fact that we've switched up the Gardevoir and Rotom to replace each other's roles, because it's going to keep them off balance. I think it's silly, but it's true. Last week, if you guys watched, we released our team builder and our battle with all of our thoughts, literally 100% of what we thought of. Everything was just present. We didn't really hide anything. They did not upload a team builder saying that there's a very good chance they played us first week of the playoffs, which is true. And so all we have to go on is their battle, which means that our instincts and our thoughts about things that they didn't bring are still very prevalent in the way that we're thinking, because we didn't have a lot of information to replace that. But we gave them an hour of content where we literally analyzed their entire team and decided on these sets as our best sets, and never gave them an option to say there were other options that we could have run with. And so they are going to be thinking the exact same way we were thinking, because we've kind of influenced the way they're thinking, because we've given them so much information. And so what we've done is we've taken all that information and we've turned it on its head and been like, well, what if we just did something that we never talked about before? And they're going to have to respect all of the stuff we talked about before and not going to see coming this new information. Whereas since they gave us so little to work with, we're still running on what we had believed to be true before and looking more deeply at their team from our own perspective, as opposed to what they told us to look for.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that we really twisted it.
The team that they brought last time around too wasn't really that surprising to me anyway. I don't know. I assume you kind of feel the same way. Like the team that they brought last time, it's a lot of the same stuff that we had talked about in our limited builder. Just like some of the sets that we thought, oh yeah, this could potentially come. Even like the Solar Beam Melmetal, you called that. You totally called that. Like, that's the thing that, you know, we knew it was a possibility. And even if they bring it this week, where we still, you know, it's a possibility that we're considering. Whenever the time comes, and I'm sure Toad will be in against Melmetal at some point in the game, as Toad is going to be on the team. We'll show in just a second, but yeah. So really, like our perspective on the build doesn't necessarily have to change. At least like our background knowledge, like you were saying, on the matchup in general, doesn't really change. We can just, yeah, like you said, just kind of turn what we told them on its head and try to take advantage of the ways they're going to most likely react to the types of sets that we brought last time around. So it's going to be a pretty interesting matchup, definitely. But let's go ahead and start showing off this team a little bit. So kicking this off with the Gardevoir. Of course, the Choice Specs set, like I was saying before, Choice Specs Modest does an absolute million to this team. 2-hit KOs pretty much everything. Again, I already mentioned the mons that it doesn't 2-hit KO on its own, but that's what the rest of the team is for, obviously. So Moonblast spam is looking quite nice. We did decide to run the T-Bolt on Gardevoir this week just to help out against the Melodic, which isn't necessarily something that comes. I think it does have a decent matchup defensively, not great offensively, but defensively does have a pretty good matchup against our team, so we felt like having super effective coverage on this for that was more important than having like fighting coverage or fire coverage for the Melmetal, which is otherwise a pretty good switch into this. So Melmetal actually doesn't appreciate taking Specs Moonblast, just fun fact. It really doesn't enjoy it that much unless it's like a specially defensive set. So, and if it's specially defensive, that's cool, because then we can switch into it a lot more easily, I think. So Moonblast, T-Bolt, really the only coverage options that we felt like we needed. So Healing Wish then is just to help support the rest of the team, and Trick can help against a potential like setup Clefable, or if like Milo becomes an actual problem and we need to trick it, then that's always an option too. Most likely not going to trick, it's more of just like an emergency button that we have access to if needed. So yeah, Speed Investment just allows it to outpace Max Speed Clefable if they decide to run like a Timid Life Orb set to just be an offensive threat. It also would outpace then a Max Speed Incineroar, which neither of those are particularly likely, but they're still possible, so I felt like that speed was probably worth it on the Gardevoir, and then the rest just thrown into HP to help us take hits from Noivern if needed. It's still a good especially defensive tank, even without having leftovers and a calm nature and all that. It's still going to be able to take a hit on the special side if we need it to. So yeah, the bulk definitely is useful for that. So that is the Gardevoir.
Yeah, and I assume that what you sent me is the correct order, right?
Yeah, yep. Next up is Hydreigon.
So next one's Hydreigon?
Yep.
Okay, so the next mon, as I totally knew going into this, is Hydreigon. This is going to be a little bit similar to last week, but we've changed the coverage up quite a bit. So it's still going to be running leftovers, and we are going to be running a Timid Nature with a decent amount of speed. I believe this is trying to outpace the Toxicroak, guaranteed.
Yep.
And we felt that we kind of still had to do that just because Max Speed Toxicroak is not an unreasonable set, and we can take one Vacuum Wave, but we certainly can't take one Drain Punch or Aura Sphere or anything like that. So, or Focus Blast or whatever it learns. So we decided outspeeding it, super relevant. Draco Meteor, yeah, they've got the Clefable, they've got the Melmetal that both resist that, but that's actually not going to be our primary click here. Our primary click against the switch-ins to this is going to be Thunder Wave, mostly because for other mons on our roster, and we'll talk about them later, getting them to outspeed certain threats, specifically the Clefable, is going to open up so many options for our roster. And if they do want to run an AV Incineroar or Clefables that are switching to Hydreigon, both of those things being Thunder Waved and then therefore not outspeeding things later, having a chance to not even act, is a huge bonus to our team. And then we decided we were just going to throw on the U-turn as well, because momentum is super useful. And if we don't feel like Thunder Waving the Clefable, or if we just want to switch out on whatever they're going to switch in, whether it's Melmetal, Clefable, whatever, U-turn just gave us a lot of utility. And I think this Hydreigon is very much a support set. We went back and forth on a number of different sets. This is probably the Pokemon that we talked about the longest.
Yeah.
Just because we didn't know if we wanted to keep leftovers or run a different item. We didn't know if what set we necessarily wanted to run, but I do think that being able to spam T-Wave early, U-turn mid-game, and Draco late-game makes this Hydreigon a threat no matter what time of the game it is, and that's actually super useful to have just in our back pocket whenever we need it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the speed control that Hydreigon offers for the team. Like T-Waving Clef is so good. Especially if they decide to bring the Sticky Web, that kind of gives us a way to combat that, but just T-Waving Clef is incredible for the copper that we'll show here in just a little bit, especially just having ways to make sure we outspeed Clefable. And it's weird being worried about outspeeding Clefable, but we actually kind of have to think about that for this game just because it's pretty good against this offensively. They did show that to us in last week's matchup. But yeah, T-Wave is really nice. U-turning on Clef is super good too to be able to get in some of our scarier threats. So Hydreigon is pretty solid here in this matchup once again. But next up is going to be the Rotom Ghost. We've already talked about this a little bit. More of a specially defensive set this time around. The coverage that we're running is still dual stabs. I'm trying to remember what we had last time. I think we had Trick, Volt Switch, Shadow Ball, T-Bolt last time, if I remember correctly.
I believe that's right.
With choice specs, so obviously pretty different than what we had last week. But this is going to be our primary response to the Vikavolt. It's able to break a sub from a max HP Vikavolt if that's the set they decide to bring. It's also just going to be able to 1v1 the Vikavolt regardless with the combination of Hex and Toxic and Pain Split. So this will always be able to help us beat that. It's not 2-hit KO'd by a non-Specs Energy Ball, so it's going to be able to take those hits pretty well. And it's going to be able to just pivot around their team pretty freely, as Trapinch really isn't to bring in my opinion, and this will always be a way that we can kind of scare out the Melodic if we need to. We can scare out the Gourgeist, and yeah, just be really annoying against a lot of their slower mons. And the vast majority of their team is going to be outsped by this as well, even with only the 12 EVs in speed. It's going to be able to outpace pretty much everything. Just the speed tier is really nice against the mons that they decided to draft. So yeah, just a pretty straightforward set, really. This is probably a Rotom you've seen many times, but just for us, especially defensive set, makes a lot of sense against their team. And I think it's going to be pretty darn annoying for them.
Yeah, and again, just one more reiteration of the fact that this was our Specs user last time. They are going to need to prepare for it to be incredibly offensive. And a lot of the checks that they could bring into an offensive Rotom don't want to be toxic. You know, especially if they're like, okay, they ran Specs last week, maybe they'll even run Nasty Plot this week, and they bring in their Unaware Clefable, we toxic it. We now know for a fact, and I know we'd prefer to Thunder Wave it, but even if it's toxic and it's unaware, that's really good information, and just for us to know, like, for the future, and actually just good to have on it. So I have, you know, this thing just gives us a lot of utility throughout the game, and I think the fact that it completely shuts down Vikavolt, like, literally entirely, is awesome. And if they do switch in the Incineroar, which is another possible check to the Rotom and the only Ghost Resist they have, Toxic really helps. We can Volt Switch if it's not Scarfed and be able to freely get out on it. So our next mon is one of the mons that we did not bring last week, but we had discussed as a possible option. Like, I think it was like the very end of the team builder. We were like, wait a minute, why did we not talk about Salazzle at all? Because this thing actually has an incredible matchup against their roster. So we decided to run the heavy duty boots on this thing, meaning that sticky webs, we don't care about. Rocks, we don't care about. So super nice to have just access to a mon that outspeeds their roster and will continue to outspeed their roster. Keeps it out of range of, I believe what our HP stat was for was a Scald from an uninvested or even slightly invested Milotic. Guaranteed survive, meaning that if we are at full health and the Milotic comes in to check us, we Nasty Plot on the switch, Sludge Wave 2, it KOs the Milotic, we're guaranteed to take a Scald, and we are able to just take out the Milotic from there.
Well, it won't quite take it out. It does a lot. It does a lot of damage. If it's like especially defensive Milo, it won't do a KO.
Okay.
It'll get really weak. Yeah, it does a ton. It'll leave it in range of everything, so that's what we needed.
And yeah, again, we were really looking at Milo as a mon that, unfortunately, with our roster, it's usually not a single mon can take it out from full by itself. Probably going to have to be a team effort. So being able to chip it down puts it in range of something else. That's basically what we're looking for out of these mons. However, the big thing that this Salazzle has is to bait in that Milotic early. We don't necessarily want to Nasty Plot the first time it comes in. The first thing we want to do is just click knockoff. We're pretty sure that this Salazzle is going to bait in the Milotic or the Incineroar every time. Getting rid of their item, the Flame Orb, the leftovers on Milotic, whatever it will be, or the Assault Vest or Heavy Duty Boots on Incineroar, getting rid of that is going to be huge for the mid game when this thing has an opportunity to set up and potentially win the game. If we have rocks up, which we'll talk about in a second, as you see, maybe the last two mons in our team both can run rocks, and one of them is. So if we have rocks up, then getting that Nasty Plot off can be a death sentence for their entire roster, especially if Noivern is handled, because they just can't break this thing by outspeeding it. Even with webs up, we have the boots this week for it, so that it doesn't have to worry about lowering its speed. The other benefit was that because of its speed tier, because we don't care about outspeeding the Noivern, we are able to run Modest, which makes it just do so much more damage throughout this.
Yeah, and then one other thing to note on that too, like maybe you mentioned it, I didn't catch it, but last time around they prepped really heavily for Salazzle. They brought, you know, a bunch of resist berries to help them take hits from this, and we just didn't bring it. They were really surprised that we didn't bring it, and 90% of the time, at least, whenever this happens in a rematch scenario, they're going to really take their foot off the gas when it comes to trying to prepare specifically for Salazzle. And I think this set's going to really help us take advantage of that, especially with the heavy-duty boots. We're not going to be worn down by hazards if they opt to bring them this time. This is going to be a real problem for them, I think, if they take their foot off the gas really at all compared to what they did last time around for the Salazzle. And I really think that they probably should bring the Milotic and maybe they could try to lean on an Assault Vest Incineroar to deal with this and to deal with Rotom. I don't know, but they're gonna have to bring, they're gonna have to either bring like a dedicated response, or they're only gonna have like one Mon that might be able to deal with this, because there's just a lot of threats on our team they have to worry about.
I do have one question, and I didn't think about it until just now when I was reading through this set. We don't have Toxic, so would we rather run Oblivious as opposed to Corrosion?
I mean, I guess like Noivern's the only thing that might taunt us.
Incineroar, I mean, it's like probably 1 or 2% more damage.
There's nothing that they don't have trace users, do they? Like, would they be able to know we don't have Toxic in any way? I don't think they have a trace user. Yeah, so we might as well. Why the heck not? We're also immune to.
I mean, I just figured we have no benefit to running Corrosion.
Yeah. The only benefit would be we can bluff Toxic. That's it.
That's true, and I mean, if you'd prefer to do that, that's fine. I have no problem with it.
I don't think there's anything that we bluff on though. There's no trace users on their team, so.
Yeah, the only thing is that they can't just go Melmetal on it.
No.
You know, even if they're like, oh, they don't have Toxic, they have Oblivious, so like Melmetal is safe. But I mean, if we just Nasty Plot into a Flamethrower, that thing's just gonna drop.
Yeah, we might not even need the Nasty Plot. I think Flamethrower just does 1 million to Melmetal as is, so unless it's especially defensive. I'm not 100% sure on that actually. What is Melmetal's Spidef stat?
65.
I feel like that probably drops to a modest Flamethrower.
To a modest Flamethrower, it's a roll if it's max HP and no special defense.
Okay, well, we should be able to get some chip on it though.
Yeah, that's after rocks.
I mean,
the
Guard is probably gonna chip it, so Guard's gonna do about 30 with Moonblast, and then we'll be good to go with everything else.
So I think it'll end up being just fine.
Yeah. Okay, so that is the Salazzle. Then we have the Copper, which is an AV set. Now, this is also kind of accommodating for the fact that we no longer have a specially defensive Gardevoir. So, in that sense, we kind of have 2 specially defensive Mons on the team. The Assault Vest and 252 Spadef on this will help it take hits from the Noivern, which we otherwise kind of struggle to switch into with this team, especially with the Gardevoir not having any form of recovery. So, this takes some burden off of Gardevoir when it comes to Noivern, but in general, like, the offense on this is pretty insane against their team. Like, that coverage is incredible. Having this thing with Heavy Slam and just adamant nature and a lot of investment, it's going to be a really good way to check the Clefable, especially if we get the Thunder Wave off from the Hydreigon. That combination is so deadly against this team, because this allows us to pretty much always have a solid offensive response, even to a Calm Mind boosting Clefable. And Clefable can't possibly run a Resist Berry that lets it beat both Salazzle and Copper. So we have Clefable in check, in my opinion, with this team quite well. So yeah, like that combination is pretty nice here, but just the combination of as well the coverage, so the Earthquake, Power Whip, and Heat Crash, and the Heavy Metal ability is going to deal with their entire team. The investment, the 208 attack investment, allows us to 2-8 KO a Gourgeist, even the fat super form, after rocks with the Heat Crash, so that could come in handy definitely in this matchup. Power Whip is mostly for the Melodic. I don't think it necessarily 2-8 KOs if it has like my Marvel Scale boost, but it does do a good chunk of damage to that. And Earthquake is, of course, for the Melmetal and the Incineroar. So, yeah, it just covers their whole team, and it's a huge issue for them, especially if we're able to outspeed, the vast majority of their Mons. And this also is nice to take some pressure off of Rotom as well, if we need to use this to do an extra damage to the Vikavolt potentially, or, they have a wide variety of special attacking threats. Even, switching this into Clefable is a lot easier with the Assault Vest as well. And I mean, knockoff Clefable is an option they could bring, I guess, but I think it's going to be kind of pressed for coverage against our team, in my opinion. I think Clefable, what really hurts Clefable in this matchup is the fact that it doesn't get hit in power anymore. So normally, like, if this was last gen, I think the best Clefable set would be like a Calm Mind Soft Boiled, Hidden Power Ground Moonblast type of set. Like, that'd be the best set against our team, I think. And there's no hidden powers now, so Clefable is forced to kind of do the same thing with 3 moves, or it's forced to not have coverage for something. So Clefable, basically, it's running Moonblast for sure, so it basically has to choose between not having Calm Mind, or it has to choose to only have coverage for Salazzle or for Copper. So in either case, we're going to have something that should be able to deal quite well with the Clef on this team. And Clef probably is the biggest threat to our team. Melmetal's a pretty big threat too, I guess, just because it's a Melmetal, but I think Clefable has the biggest potential to be annoying against us. So I would say that we keep it in check very well with this combination. The speed investment on this does allow us to outpace a minimal speed Melmetal. It is 4 base points faster than Copper, so I wanted to try to creep that as much as possible. I think there's a good chance we might be able to get a Thunder Wave off against the Melmetal with Hydreigon as well, potentially, which could be nice. But even if we don't, this gives us a good chance to outpace that. And there's a decent chance that Melmetal tries to bring Solar Beam in more of a mixed set anyway, which could very well mean they run a drop speed nature on it, so that gives us an even better chance of outspeeding it, obviously. So yeah, just a pretty solid option against their team, especially if we're able to command speed control and let this thing actually outpace stuff. I think it could put in a lot of work here.
Yeah, I agree, and I like the fact that our Copperajah here has sort of that offensive defensive pressure that I was talking about. Their team struggles to present against us, but this thing by itself can really push against them. And being able to come in repeatedly throughout the game. I know we don't have Wish, which sort of sucks for it, but is I think the fact that it can just be able to take a few hits and not have to worry too much about rocks because it resists, and not have to worry too much about just like the special hits from things because it's just gonna tank them just fine. Really gives this thing a lot of utility because it can be just a pivot for us a lot of the time. But the last mon on the team is the Seismitoad, the thing that got bopped by a Solar Beam Melmetal last week. And we have adjusted accordingly. So we have run just a little bit of special defense to make sure that if they run a pretty low amount of special attack, which I don't know what their set was last time. I didn't see their exact spread. They didn't post that, but they had to, because of the calc, even for a base, just max HP, no special defense Seismitoad, they had to run non-minus nature and at least a little bit of special attack investment. So we have decided that the minimum amount of special attack investment they could run in order to kill an uninvested Seismitoad no longer kills this Seismitoad. So they'd have to run like a decent amount of special attack investment in order to KO this Seismitoad. I think we're both on the same page here. They're probably not going to bring Solar Beam Melmetal twice. It's the kind of set that really only works once. But we decided we were just going to make sure that we're aware of it, make sure that we are prepared for it. But the fact that the putting special defense investment allows the thing to hit from Noivern better, from Clefable better, we're not complaining, especially like a special Toxicroak that they did bring last time. It just gives it a little bit more utility, a little bit more survivability. So we decided it was worth it. It helps against the Melmetal, but honestly, the primary reason to run it is because they're physically offensive threats like the Gourgeist can still OHKO with a Power Whip if it's max attack adamant, whether or not we run max defense. The Incineroar isn't going to KO with anything, even if we're like a little bit less defense. So it really we don't lose anything by putting that into special defense. We only gain things. So the set this week, a little bit interesting. We do have the rocks, as you'd expect from this thing, because rocks are just so good against their team since half their team is weak to them. And then we have the Toxic this week, as well as Infestation in order to catch and trap the Milotic specifically, but can also be potentially used for an unaware Clefable that's not got grass coverage. As we said, the Clefable is going to be missing some coverage for something, and the grass coverage seems like it's a possibility, but it's not necessarily a guarantee. So that could catch the Clefable napping if we just are able to get the Toxic and do a little bit more with Infestation. Now, of course, that thing can have Heal Bell, and that's annoying, but we have to scout their set a little bit, figure out what's going on with Clefable. And then we decided to run Earth Power this week over any sort of water type coverage. Water coverage was mediocre at best against their roster, especially the things this was guaranteed and designed to check. But the fact that ground coverage allows us to hit the Melmetal really hard, the Incineroar really hard, the Toxicroak really hard, it felt like a good coverage option for us to go with, since those are possible things that are in against the Seismitoad at any given time. Water Absorb helps it beat the Milotic, and we just didn't, we wanted to run Swift Swim more often, I think, this season, but it didn't end up being the case. And I think this Seismitoad just gives us a lot of utility defensively against their roster, really gives us a backbone to lean into, as we can pivot around with the Copperajah and the Rotom all we want, but I think just having something that's going to come in and be able to kind of actually catch those defensive mons, maybe napping a little bit, maybe expecting a more offensive set of other mons that could switch into them, gives us just a little bit more oomph behind our actual offense, because we can break those walls down and get ready for the end game.
Yeah, I think, this Seismitoad it's so important in this game, really. Like, if we're able to actually trap the Melodic, it's so huge, because getting rid of Melodic just means Salazzle's door is wide freaking open. Like they have nothing. Because if they bring Melodic, it's probably their only response to Salazzle. If I had to guess, it's probably the only thing they'll have that can deal with Salazzle. So if we're able to trap that thing and get it really weakened into range of Salazzle without giving it any kind of chance to recover, and the only thing it could possibly recover on is Copper, and then it's going to be taking Adamant Power Whips, and it's not going to be appreciating that either. So like this thing's role is just so important, especially the rocks as well. Like rocks are incredible in this matchup, as you mentioned. So if this thing can do its job instead of just promptly dying to a Solar Beam this week, then it's going to be huge, I think, for the rest of the roster. But that's the team we're bringing this week. Just to kind of, I guess, reiterate, the game plan is to break them down hardcore with the Gardevoir, try to control the speed, control the momentum with Hydreigon and with the Rotom, and then Salazzle could very well be a late game cleaner. Copper also takes advantage of the speed control just like Gardevoir does, but more often than not is going to serve kind of as a pivot for the team, along with the Seismitoad being a pivot as well as being a trapper for the Milo. So that is the squad for this week. I think it's solid. I think it's actually well thought out for the first time all season. And feeling pretty good about this one. But what do you think, Goldoa?
Yeah, I think once again, as per usual, our biggest threat to our ability to win a match is going to be the timer. You guys definitely talked throughout the season that as we got more used to the timer, we did better. And I think that's just a true fact about this kind of format is you need to practice it. It's really restrictive, but it's not something that you can't learn to play within. And I think a lot of the time, our solution to the timer has been me saying, hey, Jolt, you're the one clicking the buttons. The delay is too long or whatever. I'm defaulting to you. We've taken enough time. And Jolt, I mean, he happens to be a very talented battler, and therefore he makes the right decision almost every time. And so it's been a pretty effective system for me to just be like, nope, go ahead, do it. But for anybody who wants to really get into this, just make sure that you are practicing that timer. Because 10 minutes of your own time, it feels like more than 20 minutes of real time, but it can be much less if you aren't careful with it. So for us, once again this week, I think our biggest opponent is going to be the timer, making sure that the early game, when we are clicking those moves, we are doing it quickly. When we know what we want to do, we have our early game plan, we need to make sure we're not overthinking a situation. We need to just click the move and go for it. And then once we get into that mid game and that late game where we have a lot more options and a lot more time is opened up for us and situations have changed, that's where we need to make use of that time that we have saved up, kind of stockpiled from the beginning. And last week, I think we did a phenomenal job with it. Yeah. But because we've even planned this team even better, done a lot more calcs, we'll have a lot more in our back pocket as far as knowledge goes, which can keep that timer even more managed. But I do think it's not our opponents that are going to beat us down with something we're not expecting. Most likely, it's just going to be us mismanaging our time and then late game not having the time to really go through the opportunities and the options correctly, and then not doing exactly what we need to do. Because I think if we execute our game plan, it's a very solid game plan. It's not the game plan they're expecting us to bring. It'll work. It's just a matter of making sure that we check what they're doing early, watch what's going on, talk during the time that we aren't necessarily on the clock, and then clicking our moves as fast as possible.
Yeah, with a well-constructed team, it always, in my opinion, it always comes down to execution and hopefully not getting super unlucky. The good news is that we're not really bringing the mons that have a risk of being unlucky. Like, we don't have the Noctowl trying to spam a Hurricane, so we don't have the Terrakion trying to spam Stone Edges. So, like, in theory, like, we should be okay in the luck department, I hope, knock on wood.
Yeah, I don't think we have Power Whip.
We have Power Whip, but it's not something we necessarily have to click in the game. So, I mean, there's a chance it never even comes.
That's the only move I think we're running that's not 100% accurate. And, like,
Draco,
Toxic Thunder Wave and stuff.
Draco,
but
yeah.
Oh, Draco, true. So, there's a couple of moves, but for the most part, we have eliminated that. There's a reason we're running Flamethrower over Fire Blast on Salazzle, things like that.
And Hydreigon.
And Hydreigon. Like, we know that the Melmetal will die to a Fire Blast and may live a Flamethrower, but the fact that we can get 90% on the Melmetal is way better than potentially getting 0% on the Melmetal. So
our whole team outspeeds it, so yeah.
Yeah, so it's a, there's a lot of trade-offs going on there, and you always think about these things. But I do think that we have prepared the team that is going to give us the best chance of moving on to the playoffs, because we got into this league and we were like, whatever, just for fun. But we're 2 weeks from facing one more team for finals. So 3 weeks from winning the game, winning the championship. And that's what we're looking for on some level. If Jolt only does one league, I want to get him a championship. So I think this team has problems, like as a whole, as a drafted roster. But I think that ways that we have found to be creative with this team will continue, and the fact that we can really make sure that the pieces cohesively go together. And we have found a lot of solutions, and I think this is probably the most cohesive roster we've put together. Yeah,
I think that's definitely true, and I don't know. I'm excited to see how this team goes. We're going to be playing our game in about a half hour from now, so it's going to be exciting, I think. And hopefully we'll be able to bring you not only the battle video coming up tomorrow, be on the lookout for that, but also more coming up in the following week with a semifinal matchup. So we'll just have to see how this goes, guys. But I hope you did enjoy the team builder for this week. Make sure to let us know down in the comments below what you think about the team, what you're expecting to come out of the battle tomorrow. Just any other thoughts you guys might have. Always fun reading you guys' comments. But that's about all we have to say for this one. So be on the lookout again tomorrow for the match. And we will see you all then. Have a good one, guys.
Take care, everybody.